Welcome to Night Talk.
Hi, welcome to Night Talk. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about an old cemetery. Excuse me. An old cemetery that we plan on investigating. It's 70 miles north of where I'm located. And it has a very, very unique history. But anyway, let me get into it, and I can tell you all about it as I go. The old log church cemetery has been abandoned for many, many years, and it is so hard to find. I had a hell of a time finding this place. You could stand on the side of the road, throw a rock into the cemetery, hit a gravestone, and never know there was a cemetery there. You just can't see it. Here's a little bit of history about the cemetery. Records show the old log church cemetery dates back to at least 1875, when land was deeded for the cemetery and the Methodist Episcopal Church, or Old Log Church, is what it was called at the time, which stood on the site. A second tract of land was deeded to the cemetery in 1884, when a diphtheria epidemic led to the death of several children and filled the original cemetery. The Methodist Episcopal Church is believed to have disbanded in the early 1890s, at which time it was taken over by Friends Church. The Friends Church was about 1.5 miles to the south of the cemetery. In the early 1940s, Friends Church disbanded and moved to a nearby town. The church was torn down and they used the lumber for other things, what the hell it was. The oldest known grave in the cemetery that I have found dated back to 1875, and the most recent grave marker dated in 1934. We estimate that the cemetery has been abandoned for now, about 80 years. In the summer of 2016, I spent hours looking for this cemetery, and I was driving down the county road looking for it. I saw an elderly woman out by her mailbox with her walker. She almost fell turning around to go back to her house, so I stopped to see if I could help her. I took her mail, and I took her by the arm, and I helped her back into her house. She told me her name was Caroline, and she offered me some homemade pie, peach pie, and a cup of coffee. And I saw the pie on the kitchen table, and I love peach, I love apple pie, and that pie looked good, so I took her up on it. And we sat there talking for a little while, and I thought, well, what the hell, it won't hurt to ask her if she knows about the cemetery. So I asked her, and she kind of chuckled, and she pointed out her kitchen window and said, it's right there. And I got up, and I looked out the window, and all I saw was trees and weeds and bushes and everything else. And she said, it's right up the road, right around the corner. She said, you can't see it from the road because you have to go up a bank. Let me show you a picture here real quick. Right there, marked in red where it says Caroline's Old Yard, that's where she originally grew up. When she was a little girl, her dad owned a farm, and that's where they lived. And after her dad died, she got married, and her husband and her built a new house next to it. And that's her house is on the left side of the marker. And the cemetery is right up there on the right-hand side. Now, the cemetery is hard to see and hard to find. There it is, right there. This picture was taken with my drone. I use a drone to find certain locations, and I can go up to a mile in all directions from where I'm standing. So I use my drone a lot to find locations that are hard to find, but we couldn't find this one, and I had to take my drone and fly it up over the top of it to see what the heck we could see, and you can't see nothing. You just see a wooded area. From the road, that's what it looks like. Those trees up there, that's where the cemetery is. So you can understand why I was having such a hard time finding this place. Caroline was born December 16th, 1921, and lived next to the cemetery her entire life. Her dad, Jeremy Woods, was born in May 1901. He was a farmer and the caretaker for the cemetery for Friends Church from 1919 until he died at the age of 58. At that point, another man took over to take care of the cemetery. But in the early 1940s, it was abandoned. At that point, no one cared for the cemetery. Soon the cemetery and the people buried in the cemetery were forgotten, which is a sad thing for me. Caroline was a 97-year-old woman, and she told me about growing up next to the cemetery and the friends that she would play with. A little girl by the name of Carrie Burns. If she remembered the name right, she wasn't too sure about her last name, but she was positive the girl's name was Carrie. And Carrie had another friend with her, a little boy named Hank. Hank was about 7 or 8 years old. When Caroline was a little girl, she used to go outside and play in her yard. She didn't have nobody to play with. She was all by herself. She was an only child. And one afternoon, she told me that she was out playing in the yard, and a little girl and a little boy appeared up on the hill next to the cemetery, and they were waving at her. So she waved back, and they kind of took their arms and kind of signaled her to come up the hill. So she went up there and she started talking to them, and they would go into the cemetery and play all the time. And they would play jump rope, they would play tag, but when they played hide and go seek is where it freaked Caroline out a little bit, because Caroline would hide her eyes and she'd count to 10. Then she'd say, "Here I come, ready or not." Well, everybody knows how to play hide and go seek, so I don't need to tell you that. But she'd start looking for them, and she couldn't find them anywhere. But she could hear them laughing. And she looked all around the graves, all around the trees and everything else, and couldn't find them, but she could hear them laughing. And then finally she'd get tired of looking and she'd go home. As I was about ready to leave Caroline's house to go up to the cemetery, her son stopped by to check on her. And he was a nice guy. I can't remember his name. I think his name was Timothy or Tim, something like that. I don't know. But he kind of had a shocked look on his face when he saw an old guy sitting there with a beard and everything else. You know, like, who the hell are you? So Caroline told him that I was looking for the cemetery. And he got this really strange, surprised, shocked look on his face. He said, "Why are you looking for the cemetery?" And I told him what I was doing. And he started telling me some stories that he had of his own about seeing strange lights up at the cemetery, hearing strange noises at night. People reported seeing strange lights and stuff when they were driving down the road, and they reported seeing kids run across the road. Well, he told me all about his stories, and then I left and I headed up to the cemetery. And I walked up a bank, and here's what I found. An old log laying across the top of a couple more pieces of log. And here are the graves. I'm not going to tell you. Oh, let me back up when I skipped one. Sorry about that. I'm not going to tell you all about these graves, but a lot of them are so old that you couldn't even read them. They were so weathered that the names, dates, everything were worn off. Now, when I was walking around the area, I thought I found all the grave markers, but I went further up a hill and I found more. The area that encompasses this cemetery is just unbelievable. There's got to be at least 100 people there. You know, way back in the late 1800s and stuff, a lot of people, they couldn't afford fancy grave markers and gravestones like this. You know, a lot of them didn't have any money, so they used wood. They made wood crosses, and they engraved the person's name and the date that they died and everything else onto the wood, and they would use that. Well, over 80 years, wood deteriorates and falls apart. Before you know it, there's nothing left. So a lot of the graves up there aren't even marked anymore. As you can see on this stone, when I took this picture, I could barely read anything on that gravestone. That's how weathered it was. I got up close and I tried reading it, and I couldn't read anything off of it, but I could see where the name was engraved and the numbers and everything else. Here's one, Mary. Let me see. Mary died, May 16th, 1883, I believe it says. It's hard to see it. But my big problem is finding people to investigate this cemetery with me. I've taken quite a few people there, and a lot of them left in a hurry. I remember two women in particularly, okay? They wanted to go ghost hunting with me. They wanted to do this. They wanted to do that. They wanted to check things out. And I told them about this cemetery, and they were adamant. They wanted to go. So I packed them up with me one afternoon, and I took them up there. Mind you, I'm 70 miles from the location of this cemetery, and, well, 70 miles to the north of my location. I picked these women up to go out to the cemetery 10 miles to the south of me. I picked them up at Sapp's truck stop in Fremont, and we headed up there. But when we got there, we started walking around, and you could feel the spirits around you. You could feel it everywhere. It was like in the mid-80s, the day that we were up there. But in there, it felt like it was in the mid-70s. Well, while we were walking around, all of a sudden, one of the women screamed and turned around and started running out of the cemetery. And her friend took off right behind her. And I thought, well, what the hell is going on? So I ran over to the edge of the embankment and looked down to where my car was parked, and they were nowhere by the park or by the car. So I went down to the road, and I looked down the road. Here these two women are running down the road. Now, mind you, we're 80 miles away from their car, and their car is to the south of where we were. Well, these women were running full bore, headed north. So they would have had to run a long way in order to go around the world and get back to their car. But I drove down the road and I picked them up. And I asked them what the heck happened? What's going on? Well, the girl that screamed, somebody said hi in her ear and touched her between her neck and her shoulder. And that's what scared her off. She said it just freaked her out because she wasn't expecting it. A male voice said hi, and that was it. But I've taken other people up there as well, and a lot of them get very bad vibes, so they're afraid to go back. I've never been there at night. I've only been up there during the day. So I have no idea what this place is like at night. I go during the day so I can scope everything out and find out what's going on, see if there's any dangers, get a layout of the land and everything else. So when I go back there at night with people, they're safe, okay? For the most part, they're safe. Now, when I was looking around at these graves, I found this one. The name on the grave is Carrie Barnes. Carrie Barnes died January 19th, 1885, at the age of 9 years, 3 months, 16 days. But I couldn't find any grave marked Hank. This is the only one I could find, and it was Carrie Barnes. Now, Caroline, she thought the girl's name was Carrie Burns. So, Caroline, she's in her 70s, so her memory's going to fade a little bit. But she was pretty close between Burns and Barnes. Well, here's Carrie Barnes, her grave marker. Is that the little girl she used to play with? I bet it is. So, anyway, like I said, I'm trying to find people with the courage to investigate this cemetery with me. It's a historical cemetery, and it's quite interesting, the history of it. But I can't find anybody with the guts to do it. So, if you live, around Fremont, Nebraska, or you live, want to go on this little adventure with me, you're more than welcome. All you have to do is just let me know. And I'll drive you up there. I have no problem making the drive up there. And I'll bring you back. So, whatever the case is. Okay. I'm going to get ready to get out of here. My next feed will be Thursday, March 21st at 9 p.m. Central Time. And will be about spirit possession. I don't know much about spirit possession. I've never had it happen to me, nor do I know anybody that it has happened to. If you have a story to tell us about spirit possession that you have witnessed yourself, call this phone number you see here and leave a voice message telling us all about the experience that you had with a spirit possession. And next time, the night of the feed about spirit possession, I will play your voice message that you leave live during, the feed on spirit possession. The next one that I'm going to be doing after that on March 28th, Thursday, March 28th, again at 9 o'clock Central Time, is going to be the most common causes of hauntings. And you would be surprised at some of the normal, everyday things that occur in your life that can cause you to have a haunting. And a baby, children, or high school, teenage kids going through puberty, yeah, that can cause a haunting, and it surprises a lot of people. But there's all kinds of other things. So if you want to join us for those feeds, I'd really appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody for coming and listening to me ramble on like an old fool. So I'll get out of here. You guys all have a good night and hope to see you next time. Okay? Talk to you later. Bye.
You're gonna come back and see us, aren't you? You better be. We need you. We gotta have you. We depend on you. Come on back and see us. The feed is over. Sleep well.